So in a previous video, I made this big thread tap for a future project. Wait a second, not that one, this one. Now this is a number 2 tap in a 40mm diameter thread tap set, and as you can tell, it's pretty darn big. Now I have a project in the works where I need a lead screw which can withstand a lot of force, but at the same time it also needed to have a large pitch, and the pitch we have here is about 8mm. Now for various reasons, I wasn't able to single point thread cut the internal thread, or thread mill it. So after a bit of thinking, the decision was to make a set of taps using the helical milling process. Now this left me with a cool set of really big taps, but they also wouldn't fit in any of my tap wrenches. A bit of a shocker there, I know. Now I have been getting by so far by just using an adjustable spanner. And a lot of people have suggested some cool methods of quickly producing some tap handles, but really, I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to make a giant tap wrench. I mean, seriously, who wouldn't? So I guess let's make a giant tap wrench. So to start off, I have a piece of 25 by 75mm bar stock. It should be more than enough for the job, although it could have been a little bit thicker. Now this will make up the main body of the tap wrench, and I can add some handles later. Now this is hot rolled steel and it's covered in mill scale, so the first thing I'll do is get it cut down and cleaned up. With the part now cleaned up, I'll add some punch marks in the center of each end, and then I'll set it up in a 90-degree angle plate and drill centers in each end. The parts are a little bit too tall to be used in my big mill vise, which is why I had to set it up using the angle plate. Now the reason that I'm doing this is I'll be using the lathe to turn down each end. Now normally the go-to solution would be to hold this in a forge or chuck and then just indicate it in, but for several reasons I don't currently have a forge or chuck for this lathe, so I'm going to be stuck turning between centers. What I'll quickly do first though is I'll weld on a piece of stock, and that will hopefully act as a lathe dog to help turn the part. With the way that it's currently set up, the jaw of the chuck will push on the lathe dog and that will turn the stock. Now a big disclaimer, I have done this before in the past and it's never damaged any of my lathe chucks, but at the same time I wouldn't do this method, at least not with a good quality 3-jaw chuck, which thankfully this isn't. Normally for a job like this you'd turn to a faceplate, but that's currently in storage and I don't have time to go get it. Either way, just take it slow and everything should be fine. It's not my preferred method, but it is what it is and I have gotten it to work. And once I got most of the profile turned, I can now ditch the lathe dog and then hold the end in the 3-jaw chuck like you normally would. With the end now turned down, I'll quickly add a 20-degree taper at each end, and that's mostly for aesthetics. I'll also go ahead and round off the sides. And that's looking pretty nice so far. Next we'll add some threads at each end for a set of handles. I'll turn down the diameter at each end, leaving a little bit of stock a little bit bigger, so I can hold the part when it comes time to flip it in the chuck. I'm planning on cutting an M22 by 2 thread, and since I don't have any dies that big, I'll be single point cutting it. When I properly set up the gearbox, I'm going to cut an M22 by 2 thread. And that is one end cut. Now before I flip the part to the other side, I am going to drill and then counterbore this end with an 8mm hole for a bolt. Gonna need a longer drill bit for this, it seems. Now let's flip it and get the other side done. I'm also going to drill another hole through in the other side, but this time it's going to be a 10.5mm drill bit. And that should be the lathe work done for this part. Between you and me, it looks pretty good so far. I've now got the part set up in the milling machine, and I now need to clear out a small pocket in the centre. I'm just going to come in with a carbide end mill and just clear out all the metal. There are other ways of doing this, but a carbide end mill is going to do this pretty quickly. Eventually though I did have to swap it out for a piece of high-speed steel because the carbide started to rub when the flutes ran out. The high-speed steel still did a pretty good job though. And the final thing left to do is clean it up. Final thing that I need to do is tap that 10.5mm hole with an M12 thread, and that thread needs to go all the way through down the hole. The threaded hole is going to be for the adjustment mechanism. And that is the main body done. It did pick up a few scratches, but a few passes with the fly cutter should clean that up. The next thing I need to do is machine up the jaws. These will be made from a few pieces of offcuts, and I might as well clean them up together. I made sure to machine in a very good sliding fit between the moving jaw and the main body of the tap wrench, and then I made sure to have a slightly tighter fit for the fixed jaw. I don't currently have a corner rounding end mill, so I'm just going to file in the corner by hand. It's not click spring perfect, but it's okay. I can now get the V profile cut into each part. Now on the fixed jaw, I'll be drilling a hole in the back and then I'll tap it for M8. The moving jaw is made much the same, except the edge is taken down on each corner. That will allow for a greater clamping range of, different size taps. The bottom side also gets a counterbore hole and a grub screw. Quick sanity check to make sure that everything fits, and yeah, everything looks great. Except for my deburring, which makes a few of the corners look a little bit wonky. Oops. The next thing I need to do is make the adjustment screw. On one end, it's going to be threaded for M12, and that will go into the main body. The other end is turned down with a groove, and that will go into the moving jaw, and the grub screw should hopefully make it captive. Alright, and that seems to work pretty well. I can still go for a little bit more leverage on the part, so what I'll do is I'll take it over to the mill and I'll add 6 holes for a Tommy bar. Doing it this way means I can insert the Tommy bar and get a bit more leverage and make the part really tight on the tap. And I don't currently have a hex collar block, so I've just screwed the part into an M12 coupler nut to index the part. And that looks pretty good to me. The final thing left to do is make the handles, and here I had 2 choices. I can either press a threaded insert into the end of some tube, which would allow me to thread it onto the body, and that should make for a relatively light but strong tap handle. The alternative is to use solid bar stock. It should be a little bit stronger, but also a bit heavier too. Eventually though, I did come to a bit of a compromise. So what I'll do is I'll cut 2 lengths of solid bar stock to about 45 centimeters long, and that's near the total capacity of this lathe. Now because this part is so long and I'll be machining at the far end, I do need to quickly set up the steady rest to give it a bit more rigidity. Now this is my first time using this steady rest, and I have to admit, it's not the greatest steady rest that I've ever used, but I can work with it. The first thing I need to do is get the end turned down so I can fit a piece of tube on the end. This will help extend the overall length of the handle and give me a lot more leverage. Now the lathe wasn't too happy with my normal insert tooling, so I had to swap over to my ground inserts and take much lighter passes. I can now flip the part in the lathe and start drilling out and then boring the end. The final thing I need to do now is cut the internal M22 by 2 thread to match it up to the main body. Now I'm not the biggest fan of internal threading, and to be fair it does freak me out a little bit, but by using the dial on the carriage I can hopefully avoid crashing the tool into the end of the bore. I could have done the threading in reverse and back out of the part, however I wasn't able to do that with the tooling that I have at the moment. Thankfully though, I didn't end up crashing the tool into the part, and it turned out really well. The 2 parts fit together and the fit is really good. The final thing left to do is make up another one, and then we can get it all assembled. And those are the parts done. As you can probably see, for as big as this tap wrench is, when it's all apart it's actually pretty compact. But if you put everything all together, well, it makes a pretty big tap wrench. Big enough for what I need anyway. And good lord, this thing is just... I mean, how else do you describe it other than big? If my measurements are correct, this should easily be able to hold an M50 tap and above. And I guess for reference, not sure how much it helps, but this is my normal tap wrench that I made earlier this year, and I mean, there just is no comparison between these two tools. And of course, it holds my square taps really well. You know, that is pretty rigid and nothing is moving that. Now, one thing I should mention though is the jaws on this are left unhardened. So over time and after a lot of use, the hardened shanks of the taps can deform the surfaces of the jaws. However, I'm not expecting this to be an issue, given the few times that I'm expecting to use this in the near future. Final thing left to do is see how big this thing actually is. So by itself, this thing is only about 108 centimeters long, which I guess is pretty big. However, if you add the extension handles for the extra leverage, you gain about 75 centimeters of length on each side, and that's a total length of about 2.6 meters, just a bit shy of 9 feet. Now obviously, I'm only going to be using one extension at a time, but it is just nice to know just how big this thing is. And that is about it for now. If you want to see how these taps actually work, you can watch a previous video of me using these taps. I don't currently have another piece of aluminium which to show you it, but we still get the same results. If you want to see this tap wrench in action, you'll need to wait a few weeks because I'm still in the middle of making that project and it is taking a little bit of time. Hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.